My dear Wormwood, I have been in correspondence with Slum Trimpet. Now we have a new demon introduced into the story here. It's a tongue twister from Lewis. We're not accustomed to pronouncing the word slum, but slim. Neither are we accustomed to pronouncing the word trimpet, but trumpet. So the U and the I have been swapped to make it a tongue twister, so that we'd think it'd be slim trumpet, but it's slum trimpet. I've been in correspondence with Slum Trimpet, who is in charge of your patient's young woman. So Wormwood is in charge of the man, and Slum Trimpet in charge of his fiancée. And began to see the chink in her armor. It is an unobtrusive little vice which she shares with nearly all women who have grown up in an intelligent circle united by a clearly defined belief. And it consists in a quite untroubled assumption that the outsiders who do not share this belief are really too stupid and ridiculous. The males who habitually meet these outsiders do not feel that way. Their confidence, if they are confident, is of a different kind. Hers, which she supposes to be due to faith, is in reality largely due to the mere color she has taken from her surroundings. It is not, in fact, very different from the conviction she would have felt at the age of 10 that the kind of fish knives used in her father's house were the proper or normal or, quote, real kind, while those of the neighboring families were not real fish knives at all. Now, what he's talking about here is the belief that says because I'm doing it makes it right, or because I was brought up this way, it must be right. In other words, it's traced back to the tunnel vision of our upbringing. And, of course, he's not only talking about earlier days, but current days with the woman. But it's the unchallenged assumption that because my divine person has come into contact with this, that, or the other, it makes this, that, or the other right. Because I'm doing it, because I was raised that way, because I'm close to it. And how typical that is of we human beings. How typical that is of us, to think that because it's something we do or believe or own or think, that makes it right. And what that says is we have so much confidence, and it's probably, as he goes on to talk about pride later in the chapter, too much confidence in ourselves. Well, many adults, as he pictures her in this case, often see the world through the eyes of their childhood. I mean, a child can have a father who owns a certain, let's say, instrument, and the neighborhood child's father has a similar instrument, but there's quite a bit of difference to them. But they do the same thing. Let's say like a lawnmower. If you were raised with, the push kind, or let's say the self-propel kind, since it's better, and your neighbor with the push kind, then what they have, of course, is not a lawnmower. As far as the child can think, they don't have a lawnmower. They have some other type of gadget. Oh, it cuts grass, but it's not a lawnmower. Or another example might be a child who is raised with lovable pets may later in life view any home as incomplete without its complementary cat and dog, gerbil and hamster, goldfish and parakeet, or whatever they were raised with. In other words, the siblings and the parents don't make a complete home. The home is not complete if it doesn't resemble the local municipal zoo, where the parents beget the children, and the children in turn beget the zoo animal. But that's only a city home. A family home, you'd have to substitute a cow and a horse, and a duck and a chicken, and a sow and a lamb, and maybe an occasional wounded raccoon or possum to make up the municipal zoo around their house. Or a child raised with lovable pets may view a family as being worthy of reported to the Humane Society that makes its animals sleep outside. Some families believe that's what animals were made for, was to sleep outside. Some of us were raised in homes where animals were man's best friend, and you never let your friends sleep outside, not normal people with normal friends. So our animals always troop through the house, and other families are raised differently. So the point is, when you become an adult, you still see the world through the eyes of your childhood. You interpret reality on the basis of whether or not you experienced it. If you experienced it, that's life. That's what man was meant to be, or that's what man was meant to do. As he says here with the example of fish knives. That whenever she was 10, she would have had the idea that no one has real fish knives because they're not like my papa's. Papa's knives are real because they're Papa's and because Papa's my Papa. And so because of my thoughts, my high regard for Papa, whatever Papa has or does, or Mama, is good and is right. And anyone else who has anything that's similar to that may only be that similar, but it certainly is less. Well, this is just natural humanity, Screwtape observes. So it provides little help in toppling the girl's faith. Now, the element of ignorance and naivete in all this is so large, and the element of spiritual pride so small, that it gives us little hope of the girl herself. He said this is just natural humanity. But might the lesson be used with the young man? Is the question. And that's what the book is about, after all, not the woman, but the man. Have you thought of how it can be made to influence your own patient? Well, as most of the time happens in this book, the first paragraph, it's not always true, but here it is, sets the scene for the chapter. You have to get in mind this mentality of because something is associated to or related to you or someone that you highly regard and respect, that automatically makes it right, and especially when it's not related to you but to someone else. That's the twist of the chapter as it goes on here. Second paragraph. It is always the novice who exaggerates. The man who has risen in society is over-refined, but the young scholar is pedantic. In other words, he's too much of a quibbler over things that are unnecessary. In this new circle, your patient is a novice. He is there daily, meeting Christian life of equality he never before imagined, and seeing it all through an enchanted glass because he is in love. He is anxious, indeed the enemy commands him to imitate this quality. Can you get him to imitate this defect in his mistress and to exaggerate it until what was venial in her, you've heard of the venial and the mortal sins, becomes in him the strongest and most beautiful of the vices, spiritual pride? In other words, what he's saying here is what the girl has experienced with her refinement and with her upbringing is just natural humanity. As he said at the end of the first paragraph, the element of ignorance and naivete is all so large, there's really no way we can use this to cause any spiritual toppling in her life. But the man doesn't have this. He's ushered into this through his experiences with this new young Christian woman he has met. Therefore, he is like, a leech attached to something else that's not his by nature, that's not really him or really his. Talking about all the refinement as we've seen earlier and we shall see again here. So, since we're not dealing now with someone who has just been raised naturally like this, maybe we can turn this to our own advantage and call spiritual pride. In other words, cause him to act as though the type of circle he is now in is really his long-lost home. This is really him. The conditions seem ideally favorable. The new circle in which he finds himself is one of which he is tempted to be proud for many reasons other than its Christianity. And we've talked some about this Sunday mornings with neo-evangelicalism and this fourth position of world affirmation. They don't want to be known just for their Christianity, but for their homes and for the vocation they have chosen in life and for their dress and their refinement and so forth. So he's proud of this for other reasons than just the fact that this is a Christian group. It is better educated, more intelligent, a more agreeable society than any he has yet encountered. He is also under some degree of illusion as to his own place in it. Under the influence of love, he may still think himself unworthy of the girl, but he is rapidly ceasing to think himself unworthy of the others. And once he marries the girl, then any thought of unworthiness evaporates, of course. He has no notion how much in him is forgiven because they are charitable and make the best of him because he's now one of the family. Watch this sentence. He does not dream how much of his conversation, how many of his opinions are recognized by them all as mere echoes of their own. Still less does he suspect how much of the delight he takes in these people is due to the erotic enchantment which the girl, for him, spreads over all her surroundings. He thinks that he likes their talk and way of life because of some congruity between their spiritual state and his, when in fact they are so far beyond him that if he were not in love, he would be merely puzzled and repelled by much which he now accepts. You have to maybe read a good romance novel or seen a good romance show to appreciate the flavor, the touch of his argument here. He is like a dog which should imagine and understood firearms simply because its hunting instinct and love for its master enable it to enjoy a day's shooting. Well, let me stop here for just a moment and catch up, bring you up to date where we are. The man, he argues, is now a beneficiary of the refinement and cultivation of an educated, aristocratic group of fellow Christians. This aristocracy and culture and refinement is not his by nature or by birth or by practice. He simply has kind of inherited it from them. In other words, if he is it or lives it at all he can do is mimic or imitate or parrot what he's finding around him. And yet Screwtape's point that he wants to drive home here is this, that since this isn't him, he has just adopted this, and at best all he can do, at this time anyway, maybe later he can grow into it so it's him, but at this point, at best all he can do is parrot his surroundings, imitate those around him. If in this state we can get him so deceived, so he sits back and muses, at long last I've come home. I found my people. I found my family. To this end was I born, and for this cause came I into the world, that this might be the type of life and existence that I should have. Then we'll have him in spiritual pride, because he's living off the culture of others. He's living off the experience and refinement and cultivation of others. So this life isn't really his by birth, or by nature, or by inclination, but let's cause him to pretend that it is. If we can cause him to pretend that it is, he'll look condescendingly down on others who are not worthy of such an elite circle. And so what we'll have as our final product is pretense and pride. Yes, both of them. Pretense, because this is not really him. And pride, because he's glad that he's a part of the group, which really isn't him, and he can look down on others who aren't. Let's read the rest of the chapter and then draw out our implications for ourselves. What Mr. Lewis is saying is quite clear. Here is your chance. While the enemy, by means of sexual love and some very agreeable people far advanced in his service, is drawing the young barbarian up to levels he could never otherwise have reached, you must make him feel that he is finding his own level, that these people are his sort, and that coming among them he has come home. When he turns from them to other society, he will find it dull. Partly because almost any society within his reach is in fact much less entertaining, but still more because he will miss the enchantment of the young woman. You must teach him to mistake this contrast between the circle that delights and the circle that bores him for the contrast between Christians and unbelievers. He must be made to feel, he better not put it into words, how different we Christians are. And by we Christians, he must really, but unknowingly mean, my set. And by my set, he must mean not the people who in their charity and humility have accepted me, but the people with whom I associate by right. And there's another good, succinct explanation of what he's talking about. The end of that paragraph. Step by step by step, this building. Success here depends on confusing him. If you try to make him explicitly and professedly proud of being a Christian, you will probably fail. The enemy's warnings are too well known. If, on the other hand, you let the idea of weak Christians drop out altogether and merely make him complacent about his set, you'll produce not true spiritual pride, but social vanity, which by comparison is a trumpery, puny little sin. In other words, we don't really want either one of these things. Either we Christians to drop out, or we Christians to remain and just proud about the wrong thing. But what you want is to keep a sly self-congratulation mixing with all his thoughts and never allow him to raise the question, well, what precisely am I congratulating myself about? The idea of belonging to an inner ring, of being in a secret, is very sweet to him. Play on that nerve. Teach him, using the influence of this girl when she is silliest, to adopt an air of amusement at the things the unbelievers say. Some theories which he may meet in modern Christian circles may here prove helpful. Theories, I mean, that place the hope of society in some inner ring of clerks, some trained minority of theocrats. It is no affair of yours whether those theories are true or false. The great thing is to make Christianity a mystery religion in which he feels himself one of the initiates. Conclusion, which is off the subject for us now. We'll just finish it out to complete the chapter, though. Pray do not fill your letters with rubbish about this European war. Its final issue is no doubt important, but that is a matter for the High Command. I am not in the least interested in knowing how many people in England have been killed by bombs. In what state of mind they died, I can learn from the office at this end. That they were going to die sometime, I knew already. Please keep your mind on your work. Your affectionate Uncle, Screwtape. So, how may we apply this to ourselves? What Mr. Lewis, what Screwtape is talking about is the snare of what I might call the group mentality. The group mentality. Now, it's true of every group, but I expect and suppose it's more true of groups that deal with knowledge, particularly Christian groups, especially any young group of Christians or any group of young Christians. You can say it either way, I suppose. In other words, you may be a part of a charismatic group, as many people are, without being either charismatic or spirit-led yourself. And yet, because of the association with a group, or oftentimes it's because of the association of somebody or something or some group which is right, which is correct, which is good, we make the illegal transference from them to ourselves, assuming that mere association equals possession of what those near us have. There may be a group of which you are a part who at its core is basically and theologically intelligent without that being true across the board for everyone. You may be a part of a group that at its core is basically obedient to Scripture without that being true across the board. So we have to be very careful in this snare of false vanity. And how common this is, as I say, with any group of new Christians or any new group of Christians, especially when it deals with the subject of the acquisition of knowledge. Being around floating rays of knowledge oftentimes is very invigorating. And the illegal transference is, because I'm around all of this, I know what's going on. In other words, to say it another way, because I'm a part physically, I'm a part intellectually, spiritually, scripturally, in every other good way that we can think of, simply because I am a part physically of what's going on. Many groups are like this. You find little cult groups that are like this, and they don't really know anything, especially the new ones. They're just beginning to be trained. They don't really know anything, but the attachment to a well-known group that does know something or that does stand for something causes them to be puffed up with a false form of pride, spiritual vanity, false vanity, where both pride and pretense are included. Well, let me give you an example. I may touch on a theological theme or an issue to make you aware of it. But there is a wide chasm that separates awareness from authority. Many people make an illegal leap over that. Awareness and authority are at two different, opposite ends of the spectrum, and it's true in every area of life. Just because a child has learned that he can rub a balloon against his hair and stick it to a wall doesn't mean he's very close to becoming an electrician. It may be required of you, because it's your expertise, to replace the filters at the National Aquarium. You're a long way from being a fish, though. You may be associated or attached, but the chasm is huge between awareness, between physical function and authority or true participation in what's really going on. This is what he's arguing here, and he's saying we can get many people, and I've seen it happen many times, we can get many people to fall into a form of spiritual pride. Especially, this is true, as they say, with new Christians. Especially it's true with them. Or Christian groups which have newly arisen. I've seen it happen time and time again, that because of physical participation, they make this jump from the balloon in the hair to being a qualified state electrician or whatever. That's a huge jump to go from one to the other. So we're saying that awareness or acquaintance with a matter. Acquaintance. You might know someone as an acquaintance. That's a long way off from having them as a personal friend, which is a long way off from having them as a best friend. And yet what do people often practice? Well, what we call name dropping. Mentioning names as though they're really familiar with the person. Perhaps I think I've given this illustration before, perhaps they were standing in a very hot, people-filled university auditorium where 5,000 undergraduates were passing through a line, shaking the university president's hand and receiving their diploma. His name was William Robertson. And so when they talk to their friends later, they say, "Oh yeah, I know Bill." And what they mean by that is I shook his hand one time, and he doesn't know me from Adam, probably not even from Eve. That's how far away I am from him. But yet it's name dropping. "Oh yeah, I know Bill. Yeah, Bill and I, we spent time together before." Well, technically that's a true statement. If you want to be technical, we have spent time together before. We spent 2 seconds while we shook hands and he handed me the diploma there. But do we really know? Was physical participation enough? Well, certainly not. We would never allow that to be enough there. Well, why do we in other areas? Too many people allow it to be enough in spiritual areas, in the Christian walk. And that's why you have people, and it seems to be inexplicable, but really it's not, because they've never been a part. They've been a part, but not a part. That's why you have people who will leave a church, will leave a work, will leave a group, who maybe have been there in the body for several years. And so what calls them to leave? How can you leave what is you? That would be turning your back on yourself. Well, no one has ever done that. That's called, well, I guess they do, but that's called suicide, though. No one does that in their right mind. What I'm saying is, if that's you, you'd never leave it. You couldn't turn your back on yourself. If you turn your back on it, what it proves is there's an alienation there. That's not you. You were there in the body, but that's not really you. You were a part, but you were not a part of what was going on. And so Jesus had 12 apostles, all of whom were a part of his ministry, but one was not a part of it. Not in the final sense, not in the ultimate sense. He was there in the morning, in the afternoon, in the evenings. Old Judas Iscariot, the betrayer, he was there. He worked with the other apostles. He was, well, even the treasurer of the group. No surprise, as greedy a soul as he was. But we find at the end of the account that he was really not a part. That was not his life. That was not him. That was not his belief. And such is often true right down to our day and right down to our church as well. People make this illegal jump from awareness or participation in something to a lifelong commitment to it, saying that it is, but really it's not, or to an authority about the matter. Well, to go back to the example that I began with, by touching on some theological term. You see, a person only shows how foolish he is to boast before friends as though he really knows what's going on in that area when he only learned to spell the word last week. It's such a difficult concept, even the word is difficult to spell. Of course, you can have difficult concepts with easy spelling, such as the word S-I-N or G-O-D. But a person only shows how foolish they are because they have acquainted themselves with that. They are aware of that to act as though they really know what's going on. Now, it's something else if what you're talking about you know concretely. Then there's no excuse to water it down or to back down. But if you really don't know the issue, then the discussion should proceed reverently, humbly, and cautiously. And most of the time you don't find that to be the case or the experience. People are know-it-alls, they are blow-offs, and it's, as he says here, spiritual pride. Here you may even be able to call it intellectual pride. You say, well, what's the remedy to all of this sad situation? Well, exercise yourself and your discipline to be somewhat of an authority on the matter, and then you can talk about it. Until then, you'll just have to quote the authorities. Nothing wrong with quoting the authorities. It's better to quote the authorities than to quote yourself when you don't know what you're talking about. Now, I like sometimes to be a silent observer of conversation. And I watch people talk and argue back and forth. Sometimes they just, maybe out of the corner of my eye or ear, I can be a silent observer of what's going on in some maybe time of fellowship after a church service or whatever. And I find myself saying, that sounds surprisingly and suspiciously like me. I mean, the very arguments and the tone and the thrust and the logic and yet the person, it sounds like as though, this has been their lifelong pursuit, is the research of this topic here. Well, of course, we want to be careful with this. We're going to look at some biblical examples where the apostles fell in this area. They're a little bit humorous, but I guess some humor doesn't hurt, and I guess maybe a little humor is intended. So you see, this is what they're after with this man in Lewis's book, what I might call the group mentality. The groupies. If we can get him thinking he's a groupie, well, now, our group believes and knows thoroughly such and such, and by that he means I do too, when that is not necessarily true at all. Our group believes and knows, or our group has experienced. This has been the experience of our group. Notice the word group being emphasized, the group mentality. Our group has experienced this thoroughly or whatever, but group is not some abstract. Group is not a gray G-R-O-U-P sitting over in the corner. Group is made up of people. And you are one of those people. See, it's a false transference to say group has experienced this, group believes this, when what we're trying to say to others is this is my experience and this is my knowledge. That may not necessarily be true. But group is not just some abstract. Group is made up of the people. Do the people really know what is being claimed of them under the guise of the term group? Have the people really experienced what has been claimed for them under the guise of the term group? The group mentality. I see this so often, and I'm not thinking right now of our church. I've seen it so often in other groups where someone hears what the group says, and they go acting as though this is their theology and philosophy now, and they really don't know what they're talking about. You can hear how shallow their arguments are, and how shallow their perception of the matter is. They're like the people who don't stay around long enough to really find out what it's all about. They're too quick to run and tell others the good news when they can't even spell euangelion yet. It's just a term to them. It's good news to them, but I don't even know how to spell the concept yet. And surely younger people are more prone to fall in this area than are older people. But I think it happens across the board. Anyway, it's like a diamond whenever truth or knowledge is given to us from the Word of God. A diamond has many angles to look upon. They're called facets. Sure, a diamond is a diamond is a diamond, but it has different angles. It has many, many facets. That's what makes it, in some people's eyes, so exquisite. Let me give you another example. Take, for instance, a master artist. Now, he looks upon a painting on the wall of the National Gallery differently than would you with the untrained eye. You see all the greens in it, and he doesn't see greens because he knows there's no such thing as green. There are only three colors, red and blue and yellow. And green is a combination of blue and yellow. Well, maybe that's known by most lay people, but again, maybe it's not by some lay people. And he would know that. And that's basic, but it starts with that. The untrained eye sees green, what pretty green. And the trained eye knows the proper mixture of the proper shades of blue and yellow which produce that green. Well, so much about the colors. Let's say that they do know something about the colors. But he looks at the position, at the posture. He looks at the hues and shades of color in the background, how the background is set over against the foreground, and the foreground over against the background. And he takes all that as his cue of interpretation. Where the untrained eye just looks at it and just sees picture. Man, woman, tree, house, river, stream, flower, picture. The untrained eye just says picture. I see objects. The trained eye sees much more than that. And yet the young man or young woman can then leave the gallery and go telling all his friends, talking to them as though he's an artist. Well, now, I've been here and I saw, and you reel off the important Italian and French names, I saw this painting, and I saw that painting, and I saw the other, as though he's an authority, as though he really knows anything of what he's talking about, as though he has any experience at all. See, he has seen painting as object, and that's all. The master artist sees so much more than you or I could see if we're not trained in that area. Or let's take another example, the skilled, gifted musician. Now, to you, or to myself, whoever's unskilled or untrained, ungifted in that area, we hear tune. La-di-da-di-da, tune. You can put all the tune, you can have even all the vocal accompaniment along with that. And the skilled, gifted musician, and I've watched some of them do this, so that's as close as I am to it. See, I can say I've watched someone do this. With all the racket and all the noise and all the different instruments and all the singing, he can sit there with the trained ear and tell you exactly which instruments are being played, and he can write the score of all of them too. Now you have to be gifted and trained. That is the talent to be able to do that. But you see, you or I would go away from there saying, well, he doesn't know any more than I do. I know tune A. He knows tune A. He knows tune A in a different way, though. It's an illegal transference. It's an illegal jump to go from that of the novice to that of the trained musician. I knew someone. See, that's as close as I am to it. I knew someone who could do this. See, I can't say that I can do that because I'm a far way off from doing it. I knew someone who could listen to all this racket. It doesn't matter whether it's, classical or whether it's rock and roll. And he can hear through all the musical instruments, all the pandemonium, all the noise, all the singing whenever vocal accompaniment is there. Pick out every musical instrument. I had a music professor in college who, he's not the one I'm thinking of now, but who obviously should be able to do that, being a professor of music, and he could. And he would just amaze us by putting on, we could volunteer tunes and bring a radio in and play the radio, or it was generally records. I don't think we ever had a radio, but he had a record player there in the classroom and bring in records and play records. And he could break the whole thing down, outline it for you on the board. Now here's, first chair this and second chair that. And here's the blending in of this. And pick out with just his ear every single instrument. I can think of, drum, piano, guitar. Well, all the other instruments, the dozens of instruments that are in the orchestra, he could pick all of those out and then write the score for all of them as well. So what I'm trying to show you is, by example here, the difference between living on one side of this chasm and living on the other side of it. This is a problem Lewis is dealing with here in Screwtape Letters. That we can get people living in reality on one side, that's their experience, but on the other side they're a physical participant of that, and we get them to make the illegal jump. Well, if you'll open the Bible and turn to Matthew, his Gospel, we'll start with chapter 17. We have a couple of examples of this in the New Testament. There are some in the Old that you can probably think of as well. but Matthew 17, verses 24 through 27. Now, something I think is implied, something is behind the scenes here, and we more or less can, I think, detect that. Matthew 17, 24 through 27. You see, what I'm saying is we don't want this to be true of us in any area, but particularly in any biblical or spiritual or theological area. You can be a part of a church of truth and not have the truth yourself, or let's say it another way, not live the truth yourself. And how many people are going to be deceived in the last day by that one misconception there? But I was there, or but I went to church, or but, I had some attachment to Christianity. And Jesus said, that's not enough. I'll say, I don't know you. Depart into the outer flames. But Lord, Lord, well, don't call me Lord if you don't do the things that I say. You've made an illegal jump there. You've used my name and thought that guaranteed you, thought that brought you up to the level of all the martyrs of history because you used my name. Well, a pagan can use his name. That doesn't prove anything. So the same is true in our life and experience. When they were come to Capernaum, they that received the didrachma, the tribute money, came to Peter and said, does your Lord, does your master, your teacher, pay tribute? They came to Peter and asked it. And Peter said, yes. That's a short, brief answer, no explanation at all. It's as though it was a struggle to get that out. He saith, yes. And when he was come into the house, Jesus, not prevented, King James means preceded him with this question. Now, you're not told a whole lot of the background here, but you can kind of, I think, fill in the blank spaces yourself. We've got some religious people who are after Jesus, and the way they're going to catch him is to catch one of his apostles, one of his followers. And so they're trying to trip Peter up with this question on, does your master pay taxes? Peter doesn't really know. But he knows the best thing to do here is say yes. If I say no, I'm in trouble. So I'll say yes, and then I'll go ask the Lord about it. In other words, you can see him with his, smiling self there as though he's fully familiar with the whole subject and with the argument, as though he really knows what he's talking about. Does your teacher pay the taxes? Oh, yes. And Peter knows all about it. Peter just says yes. But why would Jesus have to preceded him? That means Peter was going to ask a question, and Jesus asked one first. Why would Jesus ask this question if there wasn't something troubling Peter in the back of his mind? Peter gave a quick, hasty reply, yes. Many people who are part of a group will try to give the quick, hasty reply of the group's official position. They don't really know, and then they come back and ask the official about the official position. They gave, this is the official position. As soon as I gave that, though, I ran out of thoughts as well as words. And that's, I think, what happened with Peter here. Yes, and he can't think of what to say beyond that. I've run out of thoughts as well as words because I've gotten in over my head. So he said, yes. When they were come to the house, Jesus asked the question before Peter has the opportunity. Peter, we don't know what he was going to ask, but he was going to surely go into this business about taxes. Now, do we pay the taxes? I'm sure that's probably what he was going to ask. Do we? He said yes to keep himself out of trouble. Lord, do we? What thinkest thou, Simon? Jesus preceded him. Surely we see the humor behind this story. Peter, and remember Peter, he's casted in the story here, not because it's just a figment of the literary imagination of Matthew, but because it fits the description of Peter we have elsewhere. What's that? An impetuous soul. Get yourself out of trouble by talking as quickly as you can. And I think the Scriptures teach us the opposite. You can stay out of trouble by keeping your mouth closed. Remember in the same chapter earlier here, whenever the transfiguration takes place, Peter doesn't know what to say whenever Elijah and Moses appear. And we're even told this. I don't know if in this account or one of the others, but, oh, Lord, let's make 3 tabernacles. One for you, one for Elijah, one for Moses. And one of the gospel writers tells us Peter said this not knowing what to say. Well, there's the humor in it. Why should you ever speak when you don't know what to say? That's the whole humor in the story. Peter said this not knowing what he should say. That's the humor. Why talk then? He didn't know what to say. Well, here he is with his impetuous burst again. Yes, and then he goes before the Lord with his thought being, as soon as I get Jesus in the house, I'm going to ask him, do we, Lord, pay our taxes? What thinkest thou, Simon? Of whom do the kings of the earth take custom or tribute? Of their own children or of strangers? And Peter saith, the strangers. And Jesus said, then are the children free. It's complicated theological interpretation, there's no doubt of that, but we're just catching the humor of Peter's psychology. Notwithstanding, lest we offend them, go catch the fish, get the coin, and pay our taxes, so we won't cause them to stumble. Then in Matthew 15, verses 10 and 11 and 15 and 16. Matthew 15, 10 and 11, 15 and 16. Jesus gives them this little parable that which goes into the man doesn't defile him, but that which comes out of him is that which defiles him. Well, on the basis of that, as you'll see in one of the other gospel accounts, verse 15, then answered Peter and said unto him, declare unto us this parable. In other words, here's the picture that Matthew is trying to give us, and I'm trying to give you by looking at Mr. Lewis's writings here. Whenever Jesus gave this parable, it was given with both the disciples in the audience as well as the Pharisees. Pharisees didn't quite understand what was going on, and neither did the disciples. But I'm sure they're all standing there, the disciples, yea, yea, amen, Master Rabbi, shaking their head as though they understand what's going on. You're not going to look otherwise because you appear like a fool. In other words, it's a group mentality. Yes, we understand. And as soon as you get behind closed doors, you sneak around the corner back to Jesus, declare unto us this parable. We were out there, we didn't catch the meaning either. None of us caught the meaning. We were too embarrassed to ask out there because it was group mentality for us. It was the old groupie attitude here. We're part of the group. It's expected of all group members to be initiates into all that the group stands for. So they sneak behind closed doors, declare unto us this parable. And he said, are ye also yet without understanding? We might come up with this proverb. Just because you have brushed up against greatness doesn't mean any has rubbed off on you. Just because you have brushed up against greatness, and the disciples certainly did, doesn't mean any has rubbed off on you. But the old group mentality says that it does. The group mentality says, because I brushed up against greatness, I now wear its skin. But that is a false transference. Now let me give you an example from our own experience and from our own midst here. Let's take for an example our teaching last summer on Matthew 5, verses 33 through 37, and Jesus' requirement of simple Christian speech. You know, the business about taking the oath, let your yes be yes and your no, no. One of you phoned me last week over a legal problem which has arisen in trying to purchase a home regarding the language of the contract with all of its swears and promises and so forth. And so our person doesn't want a word as heavy as that, the swear and the promise, and the other party doesn't want one as light as the yes or the no. And so what it's boiling down to then is an ongoing discussion of finding a happy middle point. Trying to find that happy middle point that carries with it enough of the lightness of a yes and a no and enough of the heaviness of a swear, promise, certify, and affirm. Well, you see, I think then that we're missing the whole point. I think what he said is anything more than the simple, the yes and the no, cometh of evil. I think we're missing the point if we're saying that we'll mix strength in statement with weakness in statement, so the weakness will satisfy us and the strength will satisfy you. You see, I think then we're kind of missing the essence of his teaching on simple speech required of the Christian if all we have in our mind is this mentality of watch out for this word, this word, this word, and this word, but if I can get one just a shade weaker than that, but 2 shades stronger than yea or nay, then I'm finally okay. We're missing the point then. I'm saying that truth has many facets like a diamond, that you might think, well, I've received the teaching, now I know what's going on. I can't sign anything because it's unscriptural, but has such words as swear, promise, covenant, affirm, certify, and so forth. But we're missing the point if we get lost in endless, pedantic discussions trying to agree upon a half-heavy, half-light term. Jesus said, whatsoever is more than this cometh of evil. Let your yea be yea and your nay, nay. James said, whatever is more than this will thrust one into judgment or condemnation. So here is, in other words, a shade of meaning that you may be missing. We thought because we knew we couldn't swear or promise that we've got the total truth and the total essence of what's going on. Remember, that's the one thing that we tried to pound away on in those several messages, is some people, like the old order groups, come to this passage and see it as nothing but a prohibition of going to court and laying your hand on a Bible. In other words, they don't see the spiritual import of what's going on. They don't see that what Jesus is talking about is simple speech. He doesn't want us looking for something halfway between complicated speech and uncomplicated speech. Because what did he say? These aren't my words, these are his. Whatsoever is more than this comes from the evil one. See, we can think, I know what's going on, I can't do this, and yet we've missed what the import is, what the truth of the matter is. The swear and the firm, that's just, extra stuff. What's the truth? What's the heart of what he's saying? Remember in Matthew 23 how the scribes want to fight over this business of which is more sanctified, the altar or the gift on the altar. And they said you can swear by one but not the other. I think you're confusing the whole matter. You can't swear by either. And it's not as though I'm using light and heavy to contrast what I'm talking about, but it's not as though we can put a line up here on the board at the far right having yes and no, we would call light terms, and over here at the far left, promise and swear, heavy terms, because what's Jesus saying? He's saying that all speech is equal speech. In his eyes, and therefore in our eyes, speech is speech and a man is bound by his word. Therefore, in his eyes, all of these other words are not necessary because in reality they're no stronger than this word. There is no stronger word than yes or no when those words come from the lips of a Christian. There is no stronger word than yes or no. That's the spiritual depth of what he's trying to say to us there. And we're sorry if people are brought up in a sick society, as you're going to run into, who themselves are sick in their own mind. They're so twisted and perverted in this perverted day and age of ours that they won't settle for anything short of digging your grandmother's bones up and laying your hand on it before 14 judges and taking a solemn oath. It's too bad that we live in a sick society like that. But, this is just where it is. And the Word of God doesn't give us any back door of escape there, here, there, wherever. So take it as a lesson for all of us to learn, because others of you may have to deal with this in the future. I don't know which way the laws are going or where they've been, but I know what my Lord has said. He said, whatever is more than this comes of evil. I remember here a short time ago, earlier this year, whenever we purchased some property. Here we are on the closing day, sitting in a lawyer's office, and we have our lawyer, and the other party has their lawyer, and the broker is there, and the secretaries are there. Well, they're outside the door, but they're swarming everywhere, and there's a big formal desk, and there are stacks and stacks of papers, and my lawyer is huddling with myself and my wife in one corner. And this is what we're doing. Sign this and look at this. And the other lawyer with his group is over in the other corner, and the broker's sitting on the couch watching both of them. He's glad, he sold us the property and made money from the other people, so let him split up. He stays an island unto himself because he gets that greedy couple of thousand commission, And so there we are, back and forth, and we just had page after page. They gave us a big old, zip bag to keep all our papers in. You have to carry them out in the moving van. There's so much to sign. On and on and on. read this and don't forget this. And then I'm asking this question, and pretty soon someone spoke up, just loudly in the group, said, "Isn't this all dumb?" And I spoke up and I said, "Yes, it is. As a matter of fact, that's exactly what I was thinking of. This is stupid." So what are we doing sitting around here? We're civilized, intelligent human beings. It's not like you're a savage and I'm a white man, or, vice versa, and we can't trust. We're normal human beings. We all live in the same community. We don't have some out-of-stater in here trying to do us in. They're always suspect. I would make them swear and affirm, but, we're an all-in group here. We all live in the same community. And I knew the answer to this, but I thought I would ask the lawyer anyway in front of them. Here he is. He's got experience. This is his expertise. He's got a doctorate degree, a JD, a doctorate of jurisprudence. And so I said, we're filling out all these forms. I said, why do you think we're doing that? And there's all these swears and affirms, and we told him right off. I said, we will not sign. And so they marked all of them off the paper right there in front of everyone. It's kind of quiet, and it's stiff in the room, and everyone's stiff, and the air is stiff because you mention the word Christian or religious conviction. Oh, people don't like to hear those terms. This is a legal, formal matter. Don't bring religion and subjectivism into all this, Our Christian convictions will not allow us to. So, scratching all that off. But anyway, to get back to what I was saying, I asked him. I knew the answer. I taught it. I felt like giving him a set of tapes, all of them a set of tapes on there. Deduct some from the price and give them a set of tapes. But they'd probably want to add some, then we'll listen to those tapes of yours. I said, what do you think caused all this? What's the reason behind having you sign paper after paper? And he sat there a moment and thought, just for a second though, and he said, I think it all boils down to a matter of truthfulness. He said, I think what it boils down to is nobody trusts anybody anymore. And I said, that's exactly right. I said, I knew that's what you were going to say. That's exactly right. It's because we don't trust. And then here we are. Here's the irony of ironies. Here we are furthering this distrust by all the papers and all the legal formalities. Yeah. Here's someone intelligent enough to recognize the problem is we don't trust each other as human beings anymore. Well, then why, if we recognize, if we've diagnosed the problem and we see the symptoms of it, we know what the issue is, why are we furthering it then by adding on these tons of paper with swears and affirms all through them? I thought, irony of irony. Here's someone who recognizes the problem, and yet we're all sitting here, half a dozen of us or more, furthering this very problem, furthering this very suspicion. You know what those papers and lawyers, these high-priced lawyers, you know what they do? They create suspicion. Oh, amen. Anytime some group of papers is thrust before your face, if you're like me, I'm suspicious automatically. It's unfair that society should be like that. That's not the way God intended it should be. He said, let a man's word be yes or no. You see, if we've got the spiritual truth of this, we don't want to go a jot or tittle beyond what He's told us, because we're undermining the very thing that He's after. Well, we sign the papers, but only with yeas and nays in them, though. Good biblical yes and no's. Yes, we're telling the truth. And you have to explain to people, to get me to swear to it doesn't guarantee you anything more. It doesn't even guarantee you anything legally more. It's nothing but sounds that have been produced by my vocal cords that travel through the air that your auditory nerve picks up and translates into a signal. It has no binding quality to it. I could swear, affirm, certify, I could strip naked, I could sacrifice oxen and cows before you. It won't prove anything, though. It's just noise in the air. If there's not something in the person's basic composition, in their character, in their worth as a human being, that makes things that they utter out of their mouth binding on their soul, then we don't have anything. It's all lost. Well, we went over that on all those tapes before. I'm just trying to tell you tonight, here's a shade of meaning that you may have been missing. You may have had the idea, well, don't swear or whatever, but you might have been missing the shade. The shade is, He doesn't say bargain with people and try to get a half-scriptural, half-demonic term. Just say, my yes is my yes. I can't do any better than that. And it's not that I'm sorry. I'm glad that I know the truth. I can't do any better than that. Swearing or affirming or certifying or however you want to rearrange the letters, it's no better. I can't do any better than yes. That's my best. What you're asking for is something worse, something lower than the best I can give you. The best I can give you is a Christian yes or a Christian no. Anything else that's more than that is less than that. Because it carries with it all these notions of superstition and suspicion and so forth. You know, in court you're supposed to be, what? Innocent until proven guilty, and they make you swear to begin with. You're guilty until you prove that you're innocent. The whole system is all backwards. You're innocent until proven guilty, and with the oath-taking and the American court scene and system, you are guilty until you can prove yourself to be innocent by swearing, or by calling on, some religious precedent, some religious conviction of yours that will cause you to escape that. As soon as you mention that, in a legal setting, they want to keep all the subjectivism out of it. I mean, these guys are trained, the doctors, the lawyers, all those guys are trained, for the most part, to keep all this other business out of it. Keep it all down to nuts and bolts. They can't even seem to deal in real life. They can deal with papers and facts and figures and, laws and legal statutes and so forth. But real life, in the olden days, you didn't have all this. A lawyer, could look at another man and tell whether he was trustworthy. Some can still do that, but you could look at someone and tell, is this a trustworthy person? Because you couldn't rely on the courts as people do today, that if he proves later to be untrustworthy, you can always go sue him. That was unheard of in the olden days. So in other words, what I'm saying is, your life or your financial success depended on your ability to relate to other human beings so that you could judge their character. Is this man honest or dishonest? Your life depended on that. So people got good at it in a hurry. You could look around at people and tell. You can look in their eyes and tell, is this man lying to me or not? And today, they don't even care about what your eyes look like. They can be glazed as long as you'll sign the paper. They don't care what influence you are under. But for all of our benefit, we need to remember that lawyers, I think a lot of people don't even have this concept in their mind. Lawyers and doctors, guess what? They're errand boys. They're ditch diggers. You're the boss. You're paying them.
Amen.
The doctors treat patients as though they're God. Yeah. The patient is the boss, not the doctor.
That's right.
Whoever's paying is boss, remember.
Amen.
Whoever's paying is boss. They have been given such an elevated position in society that although we're paying, we fear lawyers and doctors. They're errand boys. Fire them if you don't like them. They're ditch diggers. They do the work for you. You pay them the money and they do all the hard legal work for you. They do the footwork for you or whatever. We need to keep that in our mind in the right order. A lot of people don't have that. They're afraid of the higher-ups. If you're paying, and remember, if you're paying anybody, you're boss. You tell them, this is what you're going to do, sonny boy. This is what you're going to do. The check is signed by me. Bread is put on your table by me. Ooh, they wouldn't like to hear that because they think of themselves higher up as though you owe them money just because of who they are. They do some work and we might pay them. We'll think about it. If we don't, they'll sue us. They're lawyers. So, in conclusion, a person's strength, to get back to what Mr. Lewis is talking about from that aside, doesn't lie in the strength of the group of which he is a member. Just because you brushed up against greatness doesn't mean any is rubbed off on you. The apostles thought, if we ever have a question or a problem too great for us, we always have someone, capital S, in our midst to help. That must have been a very comforting thought to them, and it happened in Matthew 17. They'd been up on the mount, they came back down to the Father with the demon-possessed boy. It must have been a comforting thought, but it was a false comfort because it was short-lived. What did Jesus say? I am leaving you. Oh, I'm sending the Holy Spirit back to you, but you're going to have to learn to cope for yourself. That's what his ministry was all about for those 3 to 4 years with those apostles. You guys are going to have to learn to cope for yourself. You won't any longer be able to run to me if you've got some problem with demon possession or some question of religious authority with the local leaders. You won't be able to run to me all the time. Boys, you're going to have to cope for yourself. Just because you're a part of the group, he's saying, don't fall into this false notion that the group will always be here. that the someone, capital S, will always be here. A person's strength doesn't lie in the strength of the group of which he is a member. Likewise, a group's strength doesn't lie in the strength of its leader only, but in the communication, belief, and practice of the truth by every member. Otherwise, you have a weak group. You can have 4 strong people and 400 weak ones. I'll say that again. A group strength doesn't lie any more than a person's does, in the strength of its leader only, but in the communication, belief, and practice of the truth by every member. You can have a strong leader but a weak group. You can have a smart leader but a dumb group. You can have a spiritual leader but a carnal group. So it's not enough for you just to come, listen to sermons by me, or hear my testimonies of faith or whatever. You've got to know and to believe and to live the Word of God yourself. There's no substitute for that. Ezekiel said that when it comes time to count all the chips, the Son won't suffer for the Father, and the Father won't suffer for the Son. And the Son won't be blessed because of the Father, and the Father won't be blessed because of the Son. Every man will either die or be rewarded because of his own sins or righteousness. Ezekiel chapter 18. Zechariah talks about in the last day when Jesus returns and every eye sees Him, and even those who have pierced me, Zechariah said, with Jesus all speaking through him there, that every person of every family will separate and weep independently. In other words, it'll be every man for himself. Oh, it's good to have a strong group that we can be a part of, but remember, group is not an abstraction. Group equals people. If we say it's good to have a strong group to be a part of, what we're saying there is, I'm glad I've got a group where every member is strong. Group is just a word. Group isn't strong. Group is G-R-O-U-P. Group in reality is people. I'm glad I have a group that is strong, that is spiritual, that is intelligent to be a part of. What I mean by that is every person is strong and intelligent and spiritual.